What if the biggest mistake you're making with a female friend is trying too hard not to lose her? Attraction doesn't grow in a straight line. It doesn't build from constant comfort, constant agreement, or constant availability. In fact, when everything feels the same all the time, predictable, safe, and easy, the emotional intensity slowly fades. What actually fuels attraction is contrast. The shift between warmth and distance, playfulness and seriousness, attention and space. That emotional variation is what keeps someone engaged, curious, and mentally invested. Think about it this way: if someone is always available, always replying instantly, always agreeing, always being kind in the exact same way, there's no emotional movement. And without movement, there's nothing for the mind to chase, question, or feel deeply about. It becomes comfortable, but comfort alone doesn't create desire. Desire needs a little tension, a sense that things are not entirely certain, that there's more beneath the surface waiting to be discovered. Emotional contrast doesn't mean being inconsistent in a negative or manipulative way. It means being dynamic. One moment you're joking, teasing, making her laugh, the next you're calm, grounded, and a little more reserved. One day you're fully engaged in conversation, the next you're focused on your own life, not as available. That shift creates space. And in that space, curiosity grows. When she doesn't fully know what to expect from you every single time, her mind starts filling in the gaps. She begins to think about you more. Not because you're doing something extreme, but because you're not completely predictable. Predictability feels safe, but mystery feels exciting. And attraction lives in that space between knowing and wondering. Another important part of emotional contrast is not always giving validation in the same way. If you constantly compliment her, constantly agree with her, constantly reassure her, those things lose their value. But when appreciation comes at the right moments, unexpected, genuine, and not overdone, it hits differently. It feels real. It carries weight. Also, contrast shows emotional strength. When you're not reacting the same way to everything, when you're not overly affected by every little thing she says or does, it signals stability. You're not easily shaken, not trying to please, not chasing approval. That grounded energy is naturally attractive because it feels secure without being needy. Silence is part of this too. Not every moment needs to be filled. Not every interaction needs to be maximized. Sometimes pulling back, letting a conversation end naturally, or taking time before responding creates that subtle tension that keeps things alive. It gives both of you space to feel something instead of just constantly talking. In the end, attraction grows in the contrast between connection and space, between certainty and curiosity. It's not about creating distance for the sake of it, but about allowing different emotional states to exist instead of keeping everything flat and predictable. Because when emotions have depth and variation, that's when attraction has room to grow. Obvious flirting is loud. It tries to make a point, to signal interest clearly, to get a reaction right away. But because it's so direct, it often removes the very thing that makes attraction exciting: uncertainty. When everything is spelled out too quickly, there's no space left for curiosity, no room for the other person to wonder what you really mean or how you truly feel. And without that wondering, attraction loses its edge. Subtle tension works differently. It doesn't announce itself. It lingers in the space between words, in the pauses, in the small shifts in tone and behavior. It's not about saying, "I like you" outright. It's about creating moments where she can feel something without you having to explain it. That feeling, that slight question in her mind, is what keeps her engaged. Think about eye contact that lasts just a second longer than usual. A playful tease that could be interpreted in more than one way. A moment where you pull back slightly instead of leaning in too much. These are small things, almost invisible on the surface, but they create an emotional ripple. She starts to sense there's something different about the interaction, something she can't fully define, and that's what draws her in. The power of subtle tension comes from restraint. Most people rush to fill silence, to clarify their intentions, to make sure they're understood. But when you hold back just a little, when you don't over-explain or overcommit, you allow the moment to breathe. That breathing space is where attraction starts to build. It gives her the chance to lean in emotionally instead of you doing all the work. Another important part of subtle tension is contrast in behavior. You're not always reacting the same way. Sometimes you're warm and engaging, other times you're a bit more reserved, focused on your own world. This doesn't create confusion in a negative sense, it creates intrigue. She begins to notice the shifts, to pay closer attention, to try and understand you better. And that process naturally increases her investment. Obvious flirting often puts pressure on the interaction. It can make things feel forced, like there's an expectation attached. Subtle tension removes that pressure. It keeps things light on the surface while something deeper develops underneath. There's no need for big gestures or exaggerated compliments. In fact, less becomes more. A simple comment, delivered with the right tone, can carry far more weight than a long, obvious attempt to impress. It also allows her to participate in the dynamic. When everything is obvious, she doesn't have to think or feel much, she just responds. But when there's subtle tension, she becomes part of the experience. She starts reading between the lines, testing the energy, responding in her own way. That back and forth creates a connection that feels natural rather than scripted. In the end, subtle tension is powerful because it respects the emotional process of attraction. It doesn't rush it, doesn't force it, doesn't try to control it. It simply creates the conditions where attraction can grow on its own. And when something grows naturally like that, it feels stronger, more real, and far more compelling than anything that's pushed too quickly into the open. Most people believe attraction is built through the right words, the perfect line, the clever joke, the well-timed compliment. But in reality, words are only a small part of the equation. What truly shapes how someone feels about you is your behavior. The way you show up, the way you react, the energy you carry, these things speak far louder than anything you could ever say. You can tell someone you're confident, but if your actions show hesitation, overthinking, or a need for approval, the message doesn't land. You can say you value your time, but if you're always instantly available, always adjusting your schedule for her, your behavior sends the opposite signal. People don't respond to what you claim, they respond to what you consistently demonstrate. Behavior creates patterns, and patterns build perception. If you're always the one initiating, always the one trying to keep the conversation alive, always the one giving more, she begins to see you as someone who is chasing. Not because you said it, but because your actions revealed it. On the other hand, when you have balance, when you engage but also step back, when you show interest but don't overextend, it creates a different impression. It shows self-respect, stability, and control over your own emotions. Another important part of behavior is emotional consistency. This doesn't mean being predictable in a boring way, but being grounded in how you handle situations. If something small throws you off, if you get overly reactive or easily affected, it signals insecurity. But when you remain calm, composed, and unaffected by minor shifts, it creates a sense of strength. That kind of presence is naturally attractive because it feels reliable without being needy. Your body language is part of this too. The way you stand, the way you sit, the way you hold eye contact, these things communicate confidence or uncertainty instantly. You don't need to say, "I'm comfortable around you." If your posture, your tone, and your pace already show it. And the same goes the other way. No amount of smooth talking can compensate for nervous, closed-off energy. Behavior also shows your standards. If you laugh at everything she says, agree with everything she believes, and avoid any kind of disagreement, it might seem polite, but it often comes across as trying too hard. When you're willing to playfully challenge her, to express your own opinions without fear, it shows that you're not there just to please, you're there as your own person. That independence is what creates respect, and respect is a foundation for attraction. Consistency over time is what makes all of this powerful. Anyone can say the right thing once, but behavior is repeated, it's observed, it's felt. And over time, it becomes the truth she believes about you. If your actions consistently show confidence, balance, and self-worth, she doesn't need to hear it, you've already proven it. In the end, words can spark a moment, but behavior builds the reality. And attraction isn't based on what sounds good in the moment, it's based on what feels real over time. Scarcity has a powerful effect on how people feel. When something is always available, always accessible, always within reach, the mind stops valuing it the same way. It becomes normal, expected, even taken for granted. But when something is limited, when it's not always there, not always predictable, it naturally becomes more interesting. The mind leans toward it, starts to wonder about it, starts to desire it. In human connection, this plays out through your time, your attention, and your presence. If you're constantly available, replying instantly, always ready to meet, always giving your energy, there's no space for anticipation. She doesn't have a reason to think about you when you're not around because you're always around. And without anticipation, emotional buildup doesn't happen. Scarcity doesn't mean disappearing or playing manipulative games. It means having a life that doesn't revolve around one person. When you genuinely have priorities, goals, and interests outside of her, your availability becomes naturally limited. And that limitation sends a subtle message: your time has value. You're not withholding yourself artificially, you're simply not overextending yourself. This creates curiosity. When she doesn't hear from you all the time, she starts to wonder what you're doing. When you're not always saying yes immediately, she starts to question where she fits into your world. Not in a negative way, but in a way that makes her think about you more. And the more she thinks about you, the more emotionally invested she becomes. Desire grows in that space between interactions. It's not just about the moments you spend together, it's about what happens when you're apart. If every interaction is followed by immediate contact again, there's no time for those feelings to settle and grow. But when there's a gap, even a small one, it gives her mind the chance to replay moments, to feel the absence, to miss your presence just enough for it to matter. Another layer of scarcity is unpredictability. Not in a chaotic or unreliable way, but in a way that breaks routine. If she always knows exactly how, and when you'll respond, what you'll say, how you'll act, there's no excitement in the interaction. But when there's a slight variation, when sometimes you're fully engaged, other times you're focused elsewhere, it keeps the dynamic alive. It makes each interaction feel a little more meaningful, because it's not guaranteed. Scarcity also protects your self-respect. When you don't give your time and attention too freely, it shows that you value yourself. And people tend to value what they have to earn, even slightly. When everything is given without effort, it often goes unnoticed. But when there's a sense that your attention is something special, not rare, but not automatic, it carries more weight. The key is balance. Too much scarcity can feel like disinterest, while too much availability can feel like neediness. The goal is to create a natural rhythm where connection exists, but space exists too. Where she enjoys your presence, but also feels its absence just enough to appreciate it. In the end, scarcity isn't about creating distance, it's about creating meaning. Because when something isn't always there, it becomes something worth thinking about, something worth wanting, and something that holds real value. At the core of most attraction problems isn't a lack of technique, it's a mindset. Specifically, the habit of seeking approval. When your actions are driven by a need to be liked, accepted, or validated, it quietly shapes everything you do. The way you speak becomes more cautious, your decisions become more reactive, and your presence starts to feel dependent on how the other person responds. And that energy, even if it's subtle, is felt immediately. Approval seeking shows up in small ways. Agreeing with everything she says, even when you don't fully mean it. Over-explaining yourself to avoid being misunderstood. Constantly checking if she's comfortable, if she's happy, if she's impressed. On the surface, it might look like kindness or effort, but underneath, it signals uncertainty. It suggests that your sense of value depends on her reaction, and that shifts the dynamic out of balance. Confidence, on the other hand, doesn't need constant validation. It comes from being grounded in who you are, regardless of how someone else responds in the moment. It doesn't mean being arrogant or dismissive, it means being secure enough to express yourself honestly, to take up space without hesitation, and to accept that not every reaction will be perfect. When confidence replaces approval seeking, your behavior changes naturally. You stop trying to say the right thing and start saying what you actually think. You're not afraid of small disagreements because you're not trying to maintain a flawless image. In fact, those moments of honest expression often make interactions more real, more engaging, and more memorable. Another shift happens in how you handle uncertainty. Approval-seeking energy tries to control outcomes. It wants reassurance, clear signals, and guaranteed results. Confidence, however, is comfortable with not knowing exactly how things will play out. You can express interest without needing an immediate response. You can step back without worrying if she'll lose interest. That emotional stability creates a sense of ease, and that ease is attractive. It also changes how you give attention. Instead of giving it freely in hopes of being liked, you give it intentionally. Your interest feels more genuine because it's not driven by a need, it's a choice. And people can feel the difference between attention that's given out of desire versus attention that's given out of dependency. Confidence also means respecting your own boundaries. You don't say yes to everything just to keep the connection. You don't tolerate behavior that doesn't align with your standards. Not in a confrontational way, but in a calm, self-assured way. This shows that you value yourself, and that value naturally influences how others see you. Perhaps most importantly, confidence allows attraction to develop without pressure. When you're not chasing approval, you're not forcing outcomes. You're simply creating space for a connection to either grow or not. And that lack of pressure makes the interaction feel lighter, more natural, and more authentic. In the end, approval-seeking asks, "Do you like me?" Confidence says, "This is who I am." And that shift from needing validation to owning your presence, is what transforms not just how others see you, but how they feel around you. Most guys believe that once a woman sees them as just a friend, the game is over. So they either stay stuck in that role forever, or they force attraction and end up ruining everything. But what if there was a way to shift how she sees you, naturally, smoothly, without risking the connection you already have? The truth is, attraction doesn't need to be forced. It needs to be revealed. Now listen closely. You don't build attraction by becoming more available, you build it by becoming more interesting. And that starts with breaking the pattern she's used to. Right now, she probably feels safe around you, predictable even. And while safety builds comfort, it doesn't create desire. Desire needs a little uncertainty, a little mystery, something that makes her pause and think, wait, there's more to him. So you stop over-explaining yourself. You stop filling every silence. You let moments breathe. And in those moments, something shifts. She starts noticing you differently, not because you said something clever, but because you didn't. See, most guys try to act attractive. They throw compliments. They agree with everything. They try to impress. But attraction doesn't come from performance. It comes from presence. From the way you carry yourself when you're not trying to win her over. That means you don't rush to reply every time she texts. You don't always say yes when she asks to hang out. Not to play games, but because your life actually has value outside of her. And when she feels that, she begins to lean in. Another thing, stop treating her like she's fragile. Tease her a little, challenge her opinions. Not in a harsh way, but in a way that shows you're not intimidated. Because when you treat her like everyone else does, she puts you in the same category as everyone else. But when you bring a different energy, calm, grounded, slightly unpredictable, that's when she starts questioning her original perception of you. And here's where most guys mess up. They rush the transition. The moment they feel even a hint of attraction, they jump too far too fast. They confess feelings, they change their behavior dramatically, and it breaks the dynamic. Instead, you move slowly. You let the tension build naturally. You allow her to feel the shift before you ever say anything about it. Because when she starts feeling it on her own, it becomes real. Attraction isn't something you ask for. It's something she discovers. And when she starts to see you not just as the guy who's always there, but as the guy she doesn't fully have figured out, that's when everything changes. You're no longer just the friend. You're the possibility she didn't expect.